Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, boldly defies an ultimatum set by Jamaica's Prime Minister Andrew Holness, igniting a wave of reactions across the Caribbean. This moment of political defiance is not just a diplomatic confrontation, it is the spark for a larger call to action that resonates with the spirit of freedom. But why did he refuse to apologize, and what consequences followed? In the next few minutes, you'll learn how one speech delivered from a foreign leader changed the course of a nation's political landscape. Ibrahim Traoré's refusal to apologize was not just a personal stance, but a statement of solidarity with the people of Jamaica. In his speech, he spoke of the deep-rooted corruption plaguing the nation, hospitals without medicine, youth unemployment, and rampant fraud in government contracts. His words were meant to ignite change, to urge Jamaicans to rise up and demand the leadership they deserve. But this wasn't just about politics, it was about humanity. If Traore's message resonates, it could trigger a transformation not only in Jamaica but across the Caribbean. The stakes were high. If the Prime Minister held firm on his ultimatum, it could signal a breaking point for diplomatic relations between Jamaica and Burkina Faso. But Traore's words had already begun to echo, reaching far beyond the walls of Kingston. As the tension escalated, Ibrahim Traore's message began to ripple across Jamaica, reaching the very heart of the nation. His speech in Kingston, delivered with unwavering conviction, exposed the harsh truths about the country's governance. In those two powerful opening sentences, he laid bare the corruption that had held Jamaica hostage. Government contracts funneled to friends, billions of dollars disappearing without a trace. The people in the crowd who had once been silent were now standing up, energized by his words. But this wasn't just a political rally, it was a moment of awakening for the people. From the streets of Montego Bay to the rural hills of Senan, the message spread like wildfire. What had begun as a foreign leader's defiance was now a call for justice that was resonating with Jamaicans across the island. Ibrahim Traore's visit to Jamaica wasn't just another diplomatic trip. It was a pivotal moment where the past met the present. As he stood before the crowd in Kingston, he wasn't just representing Burkina Faso, he embodied the struggles of the Jamaican people themselves. His words echoed the deep frustrations of those who had long fought against systemic corruption and inequality. The young leaders, civil society activists, and everyday Jamaicans who had witnessed Traore's speech found themselves at the crossroads of history, realizing that this was no longer just about one man's opinion, it was about their collective future. The immediate impact was felt in the streets and online. The clips of his speech, raw and unfiltered, began circulating across WhatsApp groups, social media, and local radio stations. What started as a defiant stance by a foreign leader had quickly transformed into a rallying cry for change. People who had once been passive spectators were now active participants in a movement that transcended borders. But the real test would come the following day, as the Jamaican government faced a dilemma: how to respond to a growing wave of public support for Traore's words. The political landscape in Jamaica shifted dramatically after Ibrahim Traore's defiant speech. The Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, called for a 48-hour ultimatum, demanding Traore apologize publicly or face severe consequences. But the response was anything but expected. Instead of backing down, Traore's words sparked a movement across Jamaica. As the deadline loomed, the streets of Kingston and beyond filled with protesters. The government's response was swift but disjointed. Lawmakers and officials scrambled to address the growing unrest. Holness, backed into a corner, went on national television to assert his stance, but his declaration only fueled the fire. The protests that erupted were not violent but powerful, spontaneous gatherings from young people to elders, all united by one common cause, the truth. With each passing hour, more Jamaicans joined the movement, demanding accountability from the leaders. The Prime Minister's attempt to label Traore's words as an insult to Jamaica's sovereignty was met with widespread backlash. From radio stations to public forums, the message was clear. The people were tired of the corruption and were no longer willing to remain silent. As the protests grew louder, the Jamaican government faced mounting pressure. The streets were filled with thousands of demonstrators, and the public outcry couldn't be ignored. But the turning point came when evidence of corruption, long buried, began to surface. Leaked documents revealed staggering amounts of public funds misused, with billions of Jamaican dollars vanishing into ghost projects and fraudulent contracts. For the first time, the true extent of Jamaica's political rot was laid bare. In one particular revelation, over 100 billion Jamaican dollars had been lost to scams, with hospitals and schools left to suffer. $1 billion allocated for healthcare had vanished, and 800 million meant for infrastructure projects was never spent. These numbers weren't just figures, they were a testament to the systemic failure that Traore had called out in his speech. As these revelations spread, the protests gained even more momentum, and the Jamaican government found itself in a defensive position. People demanded transparency, accountability, and most importantly, justice. Traore's words had sparked not just an emotional response but a factual reckoning. The political and social divide in Jamaica deepened as the situation unfolded. On one side, supporters of Prime Minister Holness rallied behind the idea that national sovereignty had to be defended, that no foreign leader could come into their country and speak so boldly against their government. They framed Traore's speech as an affront to their dignity, a violation of their right to self-governance. Their argument was rooted in patriotism and the idea of preserving national honor, and they urged the public to stand with their leader in rejecting foreign influence. On the other side, Traore's supporters embraced his message, viewing it not as an insult but as a necessary truth. They argued that his words had given voice to the voiceless, to the millions of Jamaicans who had been left to suffer under corrupt leadership. They believed that the real threat to Jamaica's sovereignty was not from Traore, but from the corrupt politicians who had been looting the country's resources for years. They pointed to the leaked documents and growing protests as undeniable proof of the systemic abuse of power. The Steelman argument here was clear. If Jamaica was to truly regain its dignity and sovereignty, it needed to confront the corruption that had plagued it for decades, even if that meant hearing uncomfortable truths from an outside voice. As the ultimatum's deadline approached, the situation in Jamaica reached a boiling point. Traore's defiance had ignited a national conversation about corruption, justice, and accountability. But it wasn't just the protests that were causing a stir, it was the unexpected response from the public. The world watched as the Jamaican people, united across political and social divides, began to demand something more than just an apology from their leaders. In the streets, the energy shifted from frustration to hope. The protests weren't just about rejecting a foreign leader's words, they were about reclaiming their nation from the grips of corruption. In the midst of this rising wave, Traore's words had already sparked a domino effect. The demand for action was no longer confined to just a few passionate voices. It was becoming a nationwide movement. As the government attempted to control the narrative and label the protests as a foreign attack, the Jamaican people were already writing a new chapter in their history, a chapter where they were the ones calling the shots. The one-liner that defined this shift came early in P8. Truth cannot be silenced, not by threats, not by fear. This declaration resonated deeply with the masses. It was clear now what started as a political statement from a foreign leader had become a clarion call for change within Jamaica itself. The political turbulence following Ibrahim Traoré's speech triggered a ripple effect that reshaped Jamaica's future. With the protests growing exponentially and the government's response faltering, four distinct outcomes began to emerge. First, the government's control over the narrative started to erode as more revelations about corruption surfaced. Leaked audio recordings from government meetings revealed the chaos within the ruling party. Some ministers, once staunch supporters of wholeness, began to whisper doubts. "He's a hero now," one voice said in a leaked conversation, acknowledging the shifting tide. Second, international attention flooded in. Media outlets around the world, including BBC and Al Jazeera, picked up on the story, framing it as a battle between the Jamaican government and the people. The UN and African Union expressed support for the peaceful protests, positioning the movement as a call for democratic reform and transparency. Third, the pressure from within the streets intensified. With each passing day, the number of protesters swelled to over 100,000 from Kingston to rural Senan. The protests remained peaceful, but their resolve was unwavering. The government attempted to spin the protests as a foreign attack, but the people of Jamaica saw through the narrative. They were no longer willing to accept the status quo. Lastly, the political dynamics inside the Jamaican parliament began to shift. As Holness's allies pushed for an apology, whispers within parliament grew louder. "The people love him," one member texted privately, acknowledging Traore's growing influence and the mounting pressure for change. The government was now caught between preserving its dignity and responding to the will of the people. The immediate consequence was clear. The ultimatum set by Holness had failed, and Traore's words had irrevocably altered the political landscape of Jamaica. What began as a defiant speech from a foreign leader had evolved into a full-blown revolution of the people. Looking ahead, Jamaica's political and social landscape faces three possible scenarios in the next 6 to 12 months, each shaped by the ongoing protests and the fallout from Traore's defiant stand. The first scenario is the base scenario, where the government, under immense pressure, eventually agrees to a series of reforms. These include a full audit of government contracts, the creation of an anti-corruption commission, and youth job programs. This scenario would see the government slowly regaining public trust, but only through significant concessions and a long period of rebuilding credibility. In this case, Holness's political survival hinges on his ability to genuinely address the systemic issues that have sparked the unrest. The second scenario, the optimistic scenario, envisions a bold shift in Jamaica's political leadership. Under pressure from the masses, Holness and other corrupt figures stepped down, making way for a new government committed to transparency, accountability, and the welfare of the Jamaican people. With international support and the growing solidarity from African nations, Jamaica could become a beacon of hope in the Caribbean, leading the way in anti-corruption efforts and political reform. In this scenario, Traore's visit and his words would have catalyzed a permanent transformation in both Jamaica and the broader Caribbean. The third and most worrying scenario is the worst case, where the government resists the pressure and attempts to quell the protests through force. In this scenario, the government's crackdown could spark violence, leading to widespread unrest and further international condemnation. The economy could suffer as foreign investors pull out, and Jamaica's political isolation could deepen. In the worst case scenario, the very stability of the nation would be at risk, as the government continues to ignore the people's demands for justice. Each of these paths depends on the actions taken by Jamaica's leadership in the coming months. Will they choose to listen to the people, or will they continue to resist the inevitable shift toward a more just and accountable government? Only time will tell, but the fight for change has already begun, and the people of Jamaica are no longer willing to wait. As the situation in Jamaica continues to unfold, the impact of Ibrahim Traoré's defiant speech extends far beyond the borders of the island. For the people of Jamaica, the movement is not just about politics, it's a fight for their future. But it's also a message that resonates with individuals worldwide, especially those living under oppressive regimes or in corrupt systems. The struggle in Jamaica is a mirror of struggles elsewhere, where citizens face inequality, injustice, and a lack of accountability from their leaders. For the youth, this movement is a call to action. They see in Traoré a figure who is not afraid to speak truth to power, a leader who challenges the status quo, even at great personal risk. This empowerment isn't limited to Jamaica, it's global. The youth of Africa, the Caribbean, and beyond are watching, taking note, and asking themselves, if they can do it, why can't we? In many ways, the protests in Jamaica represent a broader shift in the way people are viewing power and politics. It's no longer just about choosing a leader, it's about demanding accountability from that leader. The message is clear. The people must always come first. The response from the public and the government will shape not only the future of Jamaica, but also the way political change is viewed across the globe. In the coming months, we may see new movements rise, new alliances form, and new leaders emerge, ones who are unafraid to speak the truth, just like Ibrahim Traoré did in Jamaica. As the nation grapples with its political and social upheaval, the road ahead for Jamaica lies in the hands of its people and their leaders. While the protests have highlighted systemic corruption, the real work begins now, finding sustainable solutions that address the root causes of the crisis. The first step on this road to recovery is transparency. The Jamaican government must open up its books and allow for a full audit of its finances, especially the misallocated funds that have been revealed during the protests. This audit would be the foundation for rebuilding trust between the government and the people. Without this transparency, any further attempts at reform would be viewed as insufficient. Next, there must be a commitment to anti-corruption legislation. The creation of an independent anti-corruption commission, one that operates free from political interference, is a critical step toward ensuring that those in power are held accountable. This commission should be empowered to investigate past and present corruption, and its findings should be made public. Only through such radical transparency can the Jamaican people begin to heal and rebuild their nation. Finally, the government must address the economic disparities that have fueled this unrest. Unemployment, underfunded public services, and a lack of investment in infrastructure are key issues that need to be tackled immediately. Creating job programs for the youth, particularly in sustainable industries such as renewable energy and agriculture, will help secure the future of Jamaica's next generation. These steps, transparency, anti corruption reforms, and economic investment, will not be easy, but they are the only path to healing the divisions that have plagued Jamaica for decades. If the government takes these steps, it could restore faith in the political system and allow the nation to move forward. If it fails to act, the protests will only continue to grow, and the road to true change will become more difficult. As the dust begins to settle in Jamaica, the message that Ibrahim Traoré delivered so boldly in Kingston continues to resonate with those who heard it and with those who saw the power of truth unfold on the streets. His speech wasn't just a political statement, it was a call for justice, a rallying cry for the people of Jamaica to rise up and demand what was rightfully theirs. And in the weeks that followed, that message of hope and resilience has taken root, not only in the minds of Jamaicans but across the world. In many ways, this struggle is far from over, but the seeds of change have been planted, and they are growing stronger every day. The young people who marched in the streets, the activists who spoke truth to power, and the citizens who refuse to accept corruption any longer. They have shown the world that it is possible to stand up against injustice, no matter where it comes from. Just as Traore stood with the people of Jamaica, so too must the people stand with each other, demanding better, not only for themselves but for future generations. The fight for clean leadership, for accountability, and for a fairer society is one that transcends borders and unites people from all walks of life. It is a fight for dignity, for truth, and for the kind of future where no one is left behind. This is the legacy of Ibrahim Traore's visit to Jamaica, not just the words spoken in that moment, but the ripple effect that will continue to inspire those who believe in the power of truth and the strength of the human spirit. As we reflect on the events sparked by Ibrahim Traore's visit to Jamaica, it's clear that the road to change is a collective journey. Every voice, every action, and every protest has contributed to shaping a new narrative. A narrative where the people's voices cannot be ignored and where leaders are held accountable. Now, the question is, what will you do next? For those of us watching from afar, this is an invitation to engage, whether it's by supporting movements for transparency, holding our leaders accountable, or even reflecting on the power of our own voice in the fight for justice. Change starts with awareness, and awareness leads to action. In the case of Jamaica, the work is far from over. The road to true reform will require vigilance, collaboration, and courage. Whether you're in Kingston, Ouagadougou, or anywhere in the world, the call for justice knows no boundaries. Stand with the people of Jamaica, stand with those who fight for transparency, and stand for a future where truth is the ultimate victory. The story of one man's speech is now the story of a nation, and it's just the beginning. Let's all take a step forward together.